The IAM policies that I talked about can be extended to other resources also. For example, I want to allow only a certain VPC endpoint, let's say. So you already know what a VPC endpoint is. If you don't, please go through the VPC videos in the appendix section. VPC endpoint is used to connect from EC2 instances in private subnet to S3 using AWS's private link or network backbone. Let's say I have the VPC and I have multiple EC2 instances inside of subnet in this VPC, and I have S3 here. So what VPC endpoint does, it basically creates an endpoint using which I can connect to S3 from EC2 instances which are inside of private subnet to connect to S3. That's what VPC endpoint is. Now we can create multiple VPC endpoints also in a single VPC. We can use the resource-based IAM policies or bucket policies to control access from specific VPC endpoints. Now, this cannot be done using identity-based policies. It has to be bucket policies only. Now, how do you do it? This is how it is. We already have the ERP, and in ERP, we mentioned effect, action, resource, and principle. You already know how to provide access here. And this condition one, the condition string that you are seeing, which starts from here and ends here, we can mention string not equals pro and AWS colon source VPCE. By VPCE, it means VPC endpoint, and then provide the VPC endpoint here. Now it can be string equals also. If we mention equals, then only this VPC endpoint would be allowed. If we mention string not equals, then this particular VPC endpoint will not be allowed. So we can extend the bucket policy to provide VPC endpoint level access as well. Now this is important for data engineering pipelines. So let's say you have EMR clusters or glue clusters running inside of a VPC in a private subnet. You want to make sure that only specific EMR clusters and glue clusters can access S3 using a certain VPC endpoint. You can add it here. Similarly, we can mention only VPC also. Instead of VPC endpoint, we can mention source VPCs. Now in this case, I'm providing the VPC ID, not the VPC endpoint ID, the VPC ID. And here I can mention AWS colon source VPC. So either you mention string not equals. So in that case, any access from this particular VPC will not be allowed. And if we mention string equals, then any access emanating from this particular VPC will be allowed. Of course, there are other use cases also. We can also specify individual IP addresses. So like I can mention condition IP address, meaning I'm allowing this IP address, which is basically a network address if you see. And I'm here, the function is AWS colon source IP. And then I can mention not IP address, wherein I am not allowing this particular IP address. So it means that every EC2 instance in this network would be allowed except for this one. So we can add these type of conditions also in our bucket policy to restrict access from a certain network address or certain IP addresses or certain VPC endpoints or certain VPCs.